afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm thrilled to be up here joined by these three amazing CMOs of some of the most iconic brands that you all know well, I'm sure, and live with every day. So we're going to talk about how these leaders, these marketing leaders, bring storytelling to life, how they think about priorities around brand storytelling, how they think about their resources around brand storytelling, and really they need to think about how they're keeping true to the core, the histories of their brands, even as they evolve and innovate in terms of how they're telling their various stories. So I think what's really cool is these are three brands of varying ages. Levi is over 100 years
We are 140, well, the company is 167 years old. The brand Levi's is 147 years old.
Insane. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Lime.
We're a baby. We're two.
So you have a lot to learn. And then World Surf League is right in the middle, right?
Yeah, our most recent iteration is 4 years old, but we've been around as the Association of Surfing Professionals since 1976.
Amazing. So let's start by having you each just tell everybody in the room a little bit about yourselves, because I think what's really interesting is obviously you've ascended to the role of CMO at your respective companies, but you bring to those roles such incredible backgrounds and expertise and such a rich history yourselves. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that'll provide for people some great context for how you're viewing this priority around brand storytelling. So Jen, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. First off, I don't think we're going to match up to his introduction. I feel pretty certain of that. Right? Anyway, I am Jen, and I've been at Levi's for 20 years, which I know is very unusual in the world today. And despite the fact that that seems like it had to have been my first job, since I look so young, I did work other places before, but certainly have spent the better part of my professional career at Levi's. And I started as an assistant marketing manager. I've worked in other functions, but mostly marketing. I worked in strategy. I ran e-commerce for a time, but I've been in the CMO role since 2013. So trying to debunk that myth that CMOs last only how long? 18 months? 24 months? Something like that? Yeah, so I'm going on 6 years, 7 years, something like that.
That's awesome. Amazing. Bree.
So I have been at the World Surf League for about 6 months. For those of you that don't know the World Surf League, we are essentially the enabler of surfing and surfers around the world. So we do that by creating events, all of our professional tour for surfers, experiences, and now content. So we're essentially a sports league and a media company. And prior to joining, I was at Nike for 17 years. We have Nike in common. And I think that people always ask me, like, why'd you make that change? Like Nike to World Surf League, like really big, super tiny. And I think that, I've always believed that surfing, like sport, can change lives. And I have action sports athletes in my home. And, ahead of the Olympics and ahead of some of the really important things that are happening to surfing now, I felt like it was a really great opportunity to get out of the big marketing machine, take some lessons that we've learned at Nike, and apply to a sport that I love and that I think can change the world. So.
Amazing.
So for the last 30 years, I've taken this kind of random path. In fact, a lot of my friends wondering what the hell I do or what I've been doing. But I love Buckminster Fuller, and there's this great quote about there's nothing in a caterpillar that suggests it will be a butterfly. So I have a history of chasing beautiful caterpillars. I spent 16 years at Nike. It was amazing. I left to go to 7th generation. In fact, the president of Nike was like, you've just committed career suicide. Who the hell wants to talk about toilet paper and laundry detergent? I was like, I do. Fall of 2014, I actually took a trip up to Vancouver to join Lululemon, and at the time it was an article that said it wouldn't be a brand that existed in 2015, so once again my friends were like, what are you doing? And then a year ago today I joined Lime, which has been a really crazy, wonderful learning adventure. For those of you who don't know, it's the scooter company, micromobility, based in San Francisco.
Awesome. So they all have some incredible examples of work that we're going to share with you in a couple minutes. But before we get to that, one thing and we talked about this previous, it's really interesting or important for us to define what you each mean or how you view brand storytelling at the outset, because I would imagine it probably varies based on your companies, your target audiences. and where you sit in culture. So do kick that off a little bit. How do you define it?
Yeah, so I really appreciated the U.S. Postal conversation earlier because I think the word trust came up a lot, which I think was really appropriate. But John Kotter is this behavioral guy at Harvard, and he wrote a book, and literally it could be 3 words, 1 page, which is see, feel, change. And I actually believe it's see, feel, trust. So for me, storytelling is how do you get people to see and then feel and then ultimately trust what you're doing? And that can happen across so many different forums. It's experiences, partnerships. I love film. I think film's an empathy machine. But to me, it's about, once again, getting people to see and feel and trust what you're up to. And once you have that connection, then you can deliver some other things.
Awesome. And I think we will circle back too, because we're going to lean into the leadership component in this conversation around how does a CMO guide that more than anybody else in an organization. So we'll come back to that in a minute.
Yeah, I'll add one thing to what you said, because I totally agree with that. I think that trust is essential. And I think that brand storytelling allows you to, as a brand, let consumers know who you are, and then they can choose to trust you or not. I think that the other really important part of brand equity, to me, is are you useful? You know, are you delivering? And people talked about that today quite a bit. You know, I think it's the promoter versus patron, for instance, right? And I think it was mentioned in a variety of different ways throughout the day. How do we ensure that we're actually useful and in a way even necessary to people's lives? And I think that brand storytelling allows that. I think for us at the WSL, we're really looking at the balance between overall World Surf League storytelling, as in who are we and what do we believe? Unlike Levi's, we're not well known. And then product storytelling. What do we actually do? What are we offering consumers? And we're trying to find that balance, which I think is the biggest challenge that we have going forward.
I think I view it slightly differently. I think the thing about Levi's that's so unique is people have been telling stories about their Levi's forever. This notion of brand storytelling, we talk about it like it's a new thing, but I promise you, and Pri told me hers this morning when I met her, all I have to do is say that I work at Levi's, and whoever I'm with tells me their Levi's story, and everyone has one. Your Uber driver has one, the customs agent has one. You know, whether it's my first date with my wife, my road trip in college, I took only a pair of Levi's and my trusty backpack. Everybody has one. And so what we are trying to do is create more ways for our fans to tell stories. So any content we put into the market is to inspire them to create their own content. And that content could be just telling you a story. It doesn't have to be content that we think of it in social media, but that notion of having a personal Levi's story, having something that you've done in your jeans, or other items, I'm wearing head-to-toe Levi's, that is somehow linked to the product and that the product was somehow essential in that mix. Because I do think people think of Levi's as really essential in their lives. It's their favorite item of clothing. It's that piece you just grab that sits right on top and you grab it. And so for us, that's what it is about. And our campaign, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, is this very broad notion of live in Levi's. And that is just the idea that everybody lives in Levi's and we all have a different Levi's story to tell. And so everything we do, every campaign, every effort, every community activation, every civic engagement is about inspiring you to tell your own Levi's story.
So just leading into that really quickly, you know, you all have arguably incredibly engaged, very passionate consumers, communities. So how do you sort of think about that? And we talked about this in prep too. Like, how do you think about where, as CMOs, because arguably you're the custodians of the brand within your organizations, and you have to lead and you have to have ownership over that, and yet you have to allow for the fact that brand storytelling isn't just your domain. It's totally everybody who's in your community. That's what they own as well.
Including the fans, yeah.
How do you negotiate that? How do you work through that?
If I may, because I think what you said is so important. You know, in the prep as well, Jenny shared with us, she said, hey, we'll ask about the future of brand storytelling. And when I look at the future of brand storytelling, it's exactly that. It's letting go. Letting go and allowing people to tell the brand stories for you. If you're doing the right thing, your brand is creating impact. So whether it is, in our case, the professional athletes and how we're changing their lives. This year, in 2019, we started equal pay for women. We're the first international league to do that.
Thank you.
We're changing lives in that way. You know, we're doing a body of qualitative consumer work, and I sat with these guys at the beach the other day, and I had this grown man like cry when he was talking about surfing, and what an important story for us to find a way to tell and help him tell. So I think that's the future of storytelling is that, and we don't own our stories. Like when you think about, you know, what we do is we don't know what's going to happen in a particular contest. We have to be 80% ready, but then we have to react. And our athletes really own the story. The people that are watching it own the story. So that's the future of brand storytelling, and that's what makes me most excited about it.
Yeah, I think that one kind of realization, because there's been this transition, right? And when I started at Levi's, you made a couple TV ads a year, you hit go, and you kind of hope for the best. Please. And now, obviously, constantly content, fueling the content. And this notion that, you know, we need to let go, and the consumers are going to post and tell stories, but you know, I had this realization, it was always like that. They just weren't, it wasn't publicly as visible, right? It was always like that. So how do I get back to kind of creating the same conditions, but in this new environment that allows consumers to passionately tell the stories about their experiences with our brand? It made it less scary, I think, for people that are sort of trying to tightly manage this brand. You always had people out there telling Levi's stories. You want that. Don't be afraid of that. Embrace it. Because it's not new in a sense. It's just more visible.
Yeah. Duke, for such a young company, your brand story is being told for like literally day 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean,
And it's all about love. There's no haters in the scooter world.
so tell us about that.
Actually, I love being a part of something that just invites conversation. And I totally agree on the idea of letting go, and there's so much beauty in not knowing. But I think the number one thing for us is just asking the question every day, why do we matter? If we went away tomorrow, would anyone even care? And what we've seen, I mean, we just reached 100 million rides over 2 years, which is pretty remarkable. So it shows there's incredible demand. But I think the opportunity for us is to get, the one thing we can control is, as a part of a narrative, is to get people to see why we matter. You know, it's a scooter, okay. But then when you look at it, you're like, hey, 1 of every 4 rides is actually replacing a car. There's this electric mile, there's the climate change. The vast majority of our riders make less than $50,000, and for them it's not a toy, it's actually a means to live. And so I think the more we work with government officials, and I love the naysayers. I spend a lot of time actually not trying to convince them, but really just understanding it. Because I'll be really transparent. When I first thought about Lime, I'm like, if you've ever been to Santa Monica, I'm like, this looks like a shit show. Like, like who would want to be a part of this? And then I learned about transit equity and this idea of a transit desert, and then there's a transit oasis, and how just access, simple access, can actually change someone's life. Like 80% of all our rides in Oakland go to BART. So I just think for me, I embrace the fact that there's passionate people, pro and against. But I think for us, it's a little bit of the trim tab. How can we just make sure that, above all else, we can share why we matter? And people then can determine, well, I don't believe it or I live it, but that's what we can do, and that's where we put our energy.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, and that countdown clock can't mean 51 seconds left, right? No? All right, let's talk about, let's show the work. So Levi's is going to kick it off. So Jen, tell us a little bit about this, what we're going to see, and then we'll share it.
So I can't do it in 36 seconds, but I talk fast. I'm famous for it. You know, we've been in a transition, I think, marketers, brands, and everybody's asking, like, how do we sort of, what do we stand for from a values perspective, not just a product standpoint? And, you know, people ask me all the time, like, how did you decide for Levi's that you were going to take a stance on gun safety? And I think the big difference for us at Levi's is we've always sort of led through this mantra of profits through principles, literally since Levi Strauss came to California and gave money to an orphanage, the first dollar he made. And so the pivot for us in the last few years has really been, how do we talk about those things? Because we never did. It was almost considered gauche. It was like chest beating, right? You don't talk about it. You do the right thing. You don't talk about it. And we integrated factories in the South before it was legally required. We were the first Fortune 500 company to offer same-sex partner benefits in 1992. I mean, it goes on and on. But we never talked about any of this stuff. And so the pivot for us in the last few years has really been about that, because consumers and Gen Zs and millennials, they want to know what you stand for. So, sorry, long story short, in late 2017, we knew that 2018 midterms were going to be a really, really critical election, and we say that the brand is all about using your voice, and we kind of felt that there's no more kind of pure expression of your own voice than the vote. And it wasn't about partisanship, it was about participation, but we really wanted to do all that we could to create civic engagement. And it started with a CEO program. Me and my head of CorpCom, we worked closely together, and we encouraged our CEO to take a stance and give employees paid time off to work. And he brought about 150 other CEOs on to do so, and that includes hourly workers, who it can be very difficult, right? Especially in markets where you might have to wait in line for hours and hours. So I think it's important to know that this program started as civic engagement. It started as a partnership with the ACLU and Rock the Vote. It started as a product program. We sold T-shirts that were not branded Levi's, that just said vote. And that created the opportunity to do a social media campaign with all sorts of celebs, from Dustin Hoffman to Yara Shahidi, who volunteered their time and told their stories, their personal stories about why the vote matters. That all led to a campaign. Sorry, long story short. We didn't start with the campaign. I think that's the important part. You got to line up the inside to match the outside. This was the ad that we ran to go along with it, and this will begin running in a few weeks for the full year this year as well.
Lots of early activity in Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania.
You better think about what you're trying to do to me. Think, let your mind go, let yourself be free. I ain't no psychiatrist, I ain't no doctor with degrees, but it don't take too much time to see what you're doing to me. You better think about what you're trying to do to me. Yeah. Think, let your mind go, let yourself be free. Oh, freedom, freedom, freedom.
The midterms in 2018 was the highest it had been in 70 years, so we don't take any credit for that. But there was obviously massive get out the vote efforts, and we'll be starting again in just a few short weeks for the upcoming election. We also crafted this to be global, so we want to just remind people who take for granted the right to vote, first-time voters in particular, often young people don't show up, that this is a hard one, right? Don't take it for granted. And that was the purpose. And we have now run this spot in South Africa. We've run it in India. So we've done campaigns of the ilk that I just described in many countries around the world at this point. So we're really proud of that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So Pri, why don't you set up what you're going to show us as well?
Yeah, so basically what I'm going to show you is a little bit of a case study, not an actual piece of consumer content. We're still working on that. We're trying to really figure out our voice. As I mentioned, we're really in that space of trying to find the right balance between brand storytelling and product storytelling. And this piece of content, this case study, is going to show you how we ended up having the largest audience for any surf contest in the history of the World Surf League this past December in Pipeline. And a couple of things as context. The first thing is typically wave, the quality of the wave is the primary determinant of whether or not we're going to have a great audience. Great waves, great audience, shitty waves, shitty audience. You can't tell a sponsor, hey, look, it's not our fault, the waves aren't good, right? So we're really looking for ways to mitigate that. So that's one thing. The waves were really crappy at the very end, and yet we were able to have our largest audience. And then the other thing is this balance. For the last probably 24 months prior to myself arriving with a couple of other folks, the organization's been really focused on essentially peddling the World Surf League. What is the World Surf League? And it was the right thing to do for a while. You know, we talked about our values. We talked about PURE, which is our sustainable organization and that protects the oceans. We talked about equal opportunity for women. So there's a lot of things that we've been doing that were right. We feel like now the opportunity is to talk about athletes. It's to lead with stories. Imagine if the NBA asked you to, hey, watch the NBA tonight, instead of focusing on the matchups between the teams and the athletes, right? So that's a little bit of the focus that we're trying to drive, is athlete-led storytelling and storytelling around the stakes and the places, the beautiful places that we visit in the championship tour every year. So that's the story.
The World Surf League is the global home of surfing, with events that showcase the world's best surfers on the world's best waves. Each year, we crown the world champions. But this season, WSL was also qualifying 18 athletes for the sport's debut at the 2020 Olympics. Problem is, December is one of the noisiest consumer moments of the year, when more surf content than ever is coming out of one place. So how did we cut through? We selected 8 athletes in the hunt for both the title and Olympic qualification, and packaged them up with a campaign that made every matchup into a must-see moment. Every heat is history. We took this story and told it 3 different ways to broaden our audience reach, from the core surf community to national fans, all the way out to global sports enthusiasts. For 26 days, we pushed Every Heat is History across social, owned, paid and earned. Through relentless social media, we engaged across the whole event window. When the waves went flat, we refocused onto the surfer's lifestyle, out of the water. In the US, we generated unprecedented pre-event coverage by leading with deeper athlete stories. And by harnessing Greenfly, we empowered our entire athlete network, capturing an additional 1.4 million off-platform viewers.
Let's go, Carissa!
The title race and Olympic chase came down to the very last heat of the year, allowing our anthem to play out in reality.
Every heat, it's a history, you know, and
The result? 124 million social video views, 5.1 million digital audience, 3.1 million live watch hours, leading to the biggest audience for any WSL event ever. In the end, every heat really was history.
I think one of the things that is really big for us this year, and that we didn't expect it to be that big, but we actually are seeing the results already, is the Olympics. So first time in the Olympics, and that's already making a massive difference in terms of the people that we reach. Before, it was primarily surfers or some people that were interested in the surfing lifestyle. We're now reaching a much broader audience of global sports enthusiasts. So we feel like it's a huge opportunity.
Amazing
for
platform.
Us. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
Great, so I have to follow Americana and surfing.
no, hey, the world champion is Brazilian, like me.
Okay, that's
Come
true.
on.
So quick setup here. So first audience, this is actually this goes against the grain, but we created this content, 90% of it was inward, directed to our inside community. And I know that sounds crazy, but what we really felt is we need to get people to see why this brand mattered beyond it's a scooter. So how do we widen the lens to see something much more meaningful? So sharing content that, yes, went externally, we have a very, very small media buy, but all of our energy was internal. Backdrop, we sat down with one of our power riders, or a group of them in LA, and power rider is someone who uses the scooter more than 12 times a month, and we met this guy, Carlos. And Carlos is from South Central, and he's telling the story how he's never seen the beach. And if you know LA, like South Central to the beach is like 6 miles. Like you fly in a plane, it looks like it's this close. But he also talked about how he's hourly, can't miss his job, you know, if he comes 5 minutes late to a job, he doesn't have a job. And I think a lot of people in this room don't really understand that luxury of what that means. So we said, okay, and this is just a 60-second teaser. We actually did a longer form film around it. And in terms of partnership, we actually I have a wonderful friend, Eric, too, who I partnered with at Vice and Virtue when I was at Lululemon, and he joined Anonymous. And Anonymous had created this incubator called The Lab, and we're like, hey, man, let's play together. And so Kara Stricker, who's this really just lovely, brilliant Australian director, lives in LA. She said, I got this project, let me do it. And then the key thing is there's no script. So we just said, hey, Carlos, man, you share your story. And so this is just a 60-second introduction into Carlos.
Live in the south side of Los Angeles. It's all right. To get anywhere, I used to have to take a train or a bus. But that can take forever. And you're stuck in a box, you know? But when I get on a scooter, the whole world opens up. I ride everywhere. The city just feels different. I've seen parts of LA that I've never seen before. Now that I'm able to do so much, I'm like, bro, where else is there to go?
Amazing. So, I mean, advertising it is not, right? I mean, this is so far beyond, obviously. What has had to happen? You talked a little bit about that, Duke. What's had to happen behind the scenes to really bring this to life? Best practices, things you've learned along the way, snags that you've hit along the way.
I mean, I think the most important thing is just agility and hiring people that are equipped to be agile. We've had campaigns planned and then drop them and produce something really quickly last minute. You want to respond to what's working and what's catching on, you know, really getting people excited, and that might totally, whatever your plan was, who cares what your plan was? Like, go with what's working and what people are responding to. So for me, it changes how I hire. You want people that understand how to tell stories in any format. I want to hire customer service agents that can tell stories and speak in the brand voice. And storytellers, agility, I mean, it's just very different. Where 20 years ago, I was looking at sort of very disciplined strategy. And sometimes that kind of type is too rigid, you know, but this was our plan. We can't switch gears now. No, that's what we're doing. So it just, and just the amount of content you have to create to inspire your consumers to create more content. It's kind of mind-blowing, but it's super fun. Yeah. And I just think that sense of cultural acuity and how stories will, you can't really, we're very disciplined about testing, but at the end of the day, you do need to have an intuitive understanding of how your brand is going to intersect with culture and how that can take off. And for me, that's those are the most critical things. Mm-hmm. And how do you kind of create a structure that allows for that, that's more fluid? We move people around all the time. You don't have such a limited job. Everyone does everything. Yeah. I don't have a product team and a brand team. Everybody does, everything has to be all of it. Yeah. So, sorry, that was a long answer and it wasn't very well formed.
No, perfect.
But it's totally different.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting because for us, I think, and I lost my train of thought.
That's okay, it happens to me all the time.
What were we, what was
agility?
What are your best practices?
Oh, yeah, snags.
Like, what's
the snags, right? Like, so I had a snag, and it's been a really actually critical snag for us, especially coming from a brand. So, you know, people probably think like, oh, Nike, super disciplined marketing machine. The reality is, as a marketer at Nike for 17 years, very few times was I actually looking at return on investment.
So that's crazy. We do that all the time.
It's crazy, but we didn't. We looked at insights and we asked the question, is this going to make people feel something? And of course, we leveraged a variety of levers in a pretty broad marketing mix, right? I think that with performance marketing and the fact that now you can know exactly whether it's working or not working in that particular area, lots of marketers have forgotten that there are numerous other touch points. There are numerous other levers for us to communicate with consumers. You know, for instance, one of the things that we as the World Surf League have completely neglected are the temples of surfing, surf shops that are rich in history and
local community. I mean, those are
absolutely,
huge.
and we've completely forgotten because we're just a digital media, and so that's what we do.
I
So
mean, we realize like all the great brand content, all the great experience in industry. If you come in a store, a Levi's store, and have a bad experience with a sales associate, that's what you think about the brand.
Exactly.
That's what your impression is.
Exactly, and it's the same thing for us. So we're absolutely now opening up the aperture of our marketing mix again, and saying, okay, even though we can specifically measure digital marketing and performance marketing, there are other things that we need to do. We need to be open to not knowing whether or not, you know, So I think that's the biggest snag, and convincing the CFO is always a hard thing.
I have tips on that.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts?
I just think that's it's just interesting time, especially for CMOs. I think there's this like hard, hey, everything's about the science, and what's being lost is the art form.
Yeah.
And I think getting people to see and feel that internally, why the art form is important. I mean, once you leave Nike, you're like, wait, doesn't everyone just operate this way? And you're like, no. And the CFO's like, how much revenue are you going to drive? I'm like, I don't know.
It's just a great film.
But real quickly, when I was at Lululemon, we did this campaign, and the CFO and the head of sales were like, how much revenue? I'm like, I don't know. And we were in an exec offsite, and I just said, if it doesn't work, I literally will walk out of the door. I felt that compelled on the thing, and sure enough, like the campaign just was a catalyst for this insane energy around the brand. And so I think we're at this really interesting conundrum, which is, what's the role of art, what's the role of science, and how do they, it's not either or, but it's an and in a way that I think can be mutual for everybody.
Any shiny objects excite you as far as AR, VR, you know, artificial intelligence? What are we going to see? Like, what on the horizon do you feel like is going to work for you and your brands? Or does that sort of leave you feeling like it's just further putting marketing and brand in that
I just want to be
artificial
curious
box?
as to how we can let people see and feel and trust line. That how it works. I don't have any preconception on what mechanism. It's just I'm intoxicated with. I got to get people to see, feel, and trust line.
Yeah. Cool. I think it's people. You know, as we mentioned for a while, like in the beginning, like the future of brand storytelling is allowing other people to tell your story. You know, whether that includes AR or VR or artificial intelligence, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, particularly in the world that we live in today, like I still really believe in these experiences that people have and they share with each other. You know, like your Levi's Everybody Has a Story is so true, you know. So I think that figuring out how do we continue to create these experiences. And you mentioned something earlier that I love, create the conditions.
Yeah,
how do we as marketers create the conditions for our consumers to then share our story?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I attempt to do in the job, whether or not I'm successful, but to sort of create the vision. I can't control everything. It's a really big brand. We're in 120 countries. I certainly can't, I don't control all the work that gets made, but can I create an inspiring vision that all the employees want to live up to, every sales associate, every customer service agent. You know, we're not 100% successful, but I think certainly doing a lot better than we were maybe 10 years ago in creating that inspiring vision and creating the conditions where everybody can contribute to that. So
I just want to leave it as mentioning that these are all three of these individuals were on our Forbes CMO Next list, which was a new list we launched last year, which is our attempt to identify really up-and-comers, people who are disrupting the CMO role, people who are redefining the CMO role even as they're living it through mindset, really, and mandate and ownership within organizations. And I think hopefully today we've only scratched the surface, but you've gotten a really good indication of why they were named and given that accolade. So congratulations again to you all. Thank you so much for being here with me. Enjoy your afternoon.